I've spent 300 years building, converting, and sculpting to make the world's most unique pirate-themed giants army. And today, we're gonna paint them. Okay guys, so for giants, it's a massive task because I want to paint these bad boys to a really high standard. Because I've worked on and off for 3 years on this army and there's no reason to cop out now. And I've done some more converting over the past couple of weeks since we did the last Giants video. I worked more on the bases, especially for King Broad, where last time when you saw him he had no base at all, and now he's on a freaking boat and I've sculpted rocks on top of him, and yeah, the base is just looking really fly. But I've also done more. I gave him a mast and added a gnoblar on top of that mast. I also gave him a parrot, so he really fits with the pirate theme a lot more now than he did previously. But also you guys had some amazing suggestions in the last video, and one of them was to add an anchor as a weapon to one of the guys, and I just really love that idea. So for our big muscular dude, I have made him an anchor hammer. Something like that. It took a bit of adding bits and resculpting it to make it look really nice. It definitely does feel more piratey, that's for sure. But we also had a couple of other problems with these minis, and one of them was that we've been discussing, Lucas and I, about potentially entering one of Games Workshop official competitions in the future, like the Fang or Armies on Parade. And because I gave pirate hats that we had sculpted and then put out for sale on our website, those bits are now third-party bits, which means that I cannot enter them in a painting competition. So I've had to resculpt the hats for the pirates. Even if I really like the way that they look originally, I've had to resculpt everything to make it my own and no third-party bits included. It's just the way it is with these painting competitions, so I have to adapt to that. But with that said, I think it is time to start working on the first giant. And I think King Broad is first in line because I don't know why. I'm just excited to paint him. So where does one start on a massive project like this? Personally, I think starting with the biggest area first is the way to go. On this dude, it would probably be the skin on the miniature. And Lucas and I have been working with Vallejo to bring out an ultimate paint set for the way that we paint. So I took the paint selection to the max, trying to get a nice burnt sun Caucasian skin tone on the miniature. Spending that extra little time on working in textures and highlights on the mini to really make it look the way that I wanted. I'm using a dark red brown tone, bright pale orange, a warm orange and a bright yellow to work in all the highlights. Really stretching the limits of the paint set the best way that I could do. But boy, were these paints a treat to work with, and I really got the skin tone that I wanted. And whenever I'm painting skin like this, it's never adding one color and then adding the second layer and adding the third layer and then boom, you're done. No, it's a lot of working back and forth, adding highlights, adding reflections to make it feel like the sun is shining on a more sweaty spot of his skin. I even used a bit of brown ink and sprayed it from below on some of the areas to bring in even warmer, more brown tones to the mini as opposed to the red, dark red shadows that we had, making him feel like he's really sunburned, like he's been out on the seas for ages. And in the end, after working many days back and forth on the skin, I prevailed and we have a fully covering skin on the mini with a ton of textures and a ton of flavor. On the original arts from Games Workshop, they've painted the giant with pretty much pure white bones. And personally, I feel like it lacks interest. So instead of just painting the whole thing white, I'm working both in volumes as well as snirkly patterns on the horns on the side of his face, using olive greens and bright grays. And on the skull of his head, instead of using the green and the gray, I'm using more of a beige tone to get a little bit of variation in the tones, even if they in the end might end up looking somewhat similar. With the bone colors down, it's time to paint some leather, because there's a lot of it. We've got a big glaring area around his face that is still unpainted. That's the beard. We got two obvious selections to pick from, and one of them is black and the other one is red. Black beard, red beard. Two pretty kind of famous pirates. Lucas was really pushing hard for me to paint them red, so I followed his advice and started out with a dark red, working my way up with orange. For every step of the beard painting process, I didn't want it to be like a fiery orange. Now, I wanted it to be pale orange, somewhat similar to how red hair looks in real life. So I mixed the red with hot orange and then mixed in some sunny skin tone to make sure that we had a quite desaturated color. And then just for every layer I added more sunny skin tone and just pushing it on slightly smaller surfaces, giving us a really nice shiny red beard. And always when you paint areas like this, make sure that you have a nice clean separation from the part that are not the beard, so you easily can see which part belongs to the beard and which part is skin, because they are somewhat close in terms of tones. When it comes to the wood textures on the mast on his back as well as on his peg leg, I've come up with a genius way of painting it fast but still making it look really good. So I just use the black base that I've got on the miniature and I use a bright beige tone, like bright sand or arena sand. I then just paint these patterns on it. And once we've got the entire surface painted with these patterns, left some of the areas black and some of the areas with these beige tones, we can come in with dark oak flesh through the airbrush. And if you don't have dark oak flesh, you can just use a thinned down brown ink. This way it becomes sort of a filter on the wood parts and gives you a really nice warm brown tone with some tonal variation, as well as some variation in the luminosity of the different parts of the wood. With that, I can just reapply a layer of that beige tone on some select areas to push the highlights wherever I want to. And with that, we've got a really nice wood color with good variation, high contrast. It just looks really nice. It does not get easier than this. Okay dudes, we've come quite a bit now, but one of the big areas still left to paint is the cloth around his waist. And I have this one idea that I think is great. Genius plan, if I may say so. Do you guys remember that 90s Lego pirate ship kit that they had? That was like the only one big Lego kit that I had that wasn't just like small sets as a kid, and I freaking love that pirate ship. And I want to make this loincloth of his to look like that pirate flag, having the red and white stripe as a nod back to myself as a kid, but also it's gonna make it look a lot nicer to have like a pattern variation on his loincloth as opposed to just having it in one single tone and highlighting that. But also pirate flags, a black flag with a skull on top of it. Let's try to get both of these different textures in there. I start off by spraying the part with some thinned down white through the airbrush from above. This gives me a really nice medium gray tone that I will use as a base for my whites, because it makes the white area slightly darker on every angle, and it also makes the bottom area of the cloth slightly darker, giving us a nice volumetric highlight. But it also adds another thing, and that is more vibrancy to the red, because if we have a white undercoat, the somewhat translucent red is going to be a little bit more saturated when we add it, and we like that. I simply just paint red stripes, eyeballing the width of them and the distance between every stripe. I fill out every stripe so that it's fully covered with red, and once that is done, I can highlight. The white parts are highlighted using a really bright gray, and if I want to in some select areas, I can push the highlight with pale flesh. The red areas I highlight are almost painted like a NMM highlight, using pale flesh mixed with the red. For the black pirate flag part, we can use some unconventional methods to get some nice textures in there. How about a piece of foam to stipple in some textures? I had some ice yellow and black on the palette, mixed them together on the sponge. It's really nice if you get different variations of brightness in there. It's pretty much okay if you don't mix it too much into the sponge. Stippling some black grays in there to get some textures. Even on a display piece, using techniques like this is really awesome because it's gonna get you a nice tonal variation and and it's super fast. When that is done, we just need to freehand the skulls in there. This is one of my big weaknesses, but working back and forth for a bit, we got something that looks really nice. Now to get even more tonal variation, we can use the airbrush to blend in some of the shadows with a really thin down black. We can also add some more textures using a finely tipped brush, adding scratches and dots to push the highlights and contrast wherever we want it. So guys, it is now time to paint our gnoblar, and I want to keep it simple. Green skin, of course, and a wooden peg leg. We then paint the sword with a shiny edge and a rusty side. And finally the thing that's gonna give him character, because this gnoblar really looks up to his master. And he wants his clothes to match the clothes of King Broad. So we're gonna paint red and white stripes on his shirt, because why not? And then of course we need to add some cannonballs up to his mask, because if he's gonna help King Broad in any way, it's gonna be by throwing some heavy rocks on whatever enemy he's facing. It also gives a little bit more life to that part of the miniature that otherwise would just look like wooden parts with a small mini on top of it. So, one of the things that I've felt a little bit sad about lately with the projects that we do for ourselves in videos is that often for projects that are a bit bigger, we're always on a time crunch because we have to publish a video every week. If we don't, someone's not getting cookies, okay? And it's not gonna be me. So we have to finish them every week. Meaning that a lot of projects, and especially when it comes to painting, we don't get to spend that extra time to make every part feel really nice. And maybe I won't be able to do every part of this mini to 110%, but at least I want to spend that extra time to make sure that I have nice colors on every part. And one of those areas where I do want to do something fun is on the parrot. So instead of just painting this parrot with, you know, random color and just calling it a day, I found this really nice reference that's like the classic parrot with red, yellow, and blue. So I just start off by base coating all of these areas, cleaning it up as well as I can. And remember that every single part of the mini needs to be shaded and highlighted with volumetric lighting to match the part of the giant. And while I paint this parrot, let me tell you about when Lucas and I travel. Whenever we travel to a convention, we like to bring our computers and watch films and TV series on the airports and in hotel rooms. But this also means that we have to connect to public Wi-Fi, putting ourselves at risk. The good thing is that with this week's sponsor, nordvpn.com/Squidmar, we get to stay a lot more safe during travels and keep intruders out of our computers. Another good thing is that whenever we're out traveling with NordVPN, we can change our location from USA or Australia back to Sweden and watch all of those Swedish TV series and movies that we like to watch. But maybe you just live in the US and you want to watch all of the Miyazaki movies, but they are not available on Netflix. With a simple click, you can change your location to Japan and all of a sudden you have the whole library. But there are other great things with using NordVPN. Their threat protection is one of them. It works in the background checking for malware, blocking pop-up ads, giving you a way smoother browsing experience. And you don't even have to be connected to their VPNs for it to work for you. If you want to try out NordVPN right now, if you get a 2-year plan, you get 4 additional months for free. If you just follow our link down below, nordvpn.com/Squidmar. And the best thing is, if you found that this was not for you or it doesn't work the way that you want it, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. Now let's get back to the pirates. Similarly to with the loincloth, I can use the sponge method to make an interesting hammer, stippling a bunch of greens and then just edge highlighting the patterns on it. There's a massive log at the center of the mini that has not been painted yet. And the patterns on this log that he carries, or tree stump or whatever it is so clearly a birch. I know this because I live in the city of birches. So let's make sure that it looks like a good looking birch. Starting off by highlighting the whole piece with the airbrush, making a zenithal highlight. I can then go in with dark oath flesh through the airbrush to base coat the entire thing. With that down, I bring out some grays, covering all of the bark parts with a medium gray that's got a little bit of a brown tone to it. And then slapping in the final highlight, deck tan. I don't want to push the highlights too far on this, because if we start adding in whites or pale flesh, it's going to be really white and it's probably not going to look as smooth. So keeping it simple on some of the areas where you don't want the focus to be is the way to go. So deck tan will be the final highlight on this area. So now we just gotta paint in the rest of the details of the weapon. It is time to paint the base, and this is a big one. I paint all of the sand areas using arena sand, covering all of the sand parts, and paint the rocks using a really dark brown as my base tone. Since I'm spraying this through the airbrush, I can also spray the bottom parts of the boat, striking 2 birds with 1 stone. On all of the rock parts, I'm instead using somewhat of a beige and gray and brown tone mix, just going back and forth to not take too much focus and adding too much saturation, but still getting a nice variation of the tones and also nice highlights. I feel like the color composition of the base is somewhat coming together, but there's a ton of other parts to paint as well. One of them being the massive freaking statue on the front of the boat. I'm gonna paint that in gold using our non-metallic metal painting technique. Because why not? It's a magic land, let's make it gold. I want the wood part of the boat to feel like it's been out for a bit in the sun, like a really grayish tone to it. So I'm using deck tan again to add in patterns and highlights to all of the wooden parts. There is still a ton of details to paint in there, and if I want to be able to use this in a painting competition, I'll need to paint it all to a high detail standard. So I'm painting the barnacles green and then adding some green vials at the center of the base, and then painting some pink clams. We have paint on all of the details, but I'm still lacking some of that variation. I feel like I need to get some greens in there, as there's algae growing on the wooden parts and maybe some of the rock parts as well. So I start off by spraying with the green ink on the wood parts, highlighting them with Scorpy green. And as a final step on the base, I make a pigment wash. And what is this, you might ask? Well, I take Vallejo green pigments, mixing them with water and flow improver, and just slapping them on every part that I want to have some variation to. Especially on the bottom part of the boat, but also on some of the rock areas. And one thing that you can do on the Mini, like if you want to add some of those tones that are on the base onto the Mini, is to take that pigment wash and add it to some select areas. I'm adding some pigments to his weapon because it's a tree and you probably have algae or moss growing on it. I also added it to some of its peg leg because sometimes it sits around in the water for a long time and algae starts growing there. So guys, the pirate is nearing done. I don't know how many hours I've spent on this, but it's definitely more than a 40-hour work week, which means that painting this entire army is going to take me hundreds of hours. Is it worth it? I don't know. Do you guys want to see more of these videos of me painting giants? I'll happily do it, but you need to smash the like button so that we know that you want to see more of this. Otherwise, I'm probably just gonna do it on my spare time and it's gonna take me 5 years to do. But now, I still have a couple of things left to do. For one is to add water effects to the base. I want to have some waves coming crashing in, or just like water at least, to make it really feel like they're, you know, pirates out on the seas or by the beach on shore. But I'm gonna do that with the rest of the minis so all of them get the exact same treatment. So now I think we can do a grand reveal. Massive thanks for sticking around through the entire video. I really appreciate it. Remember to smash that like button. Support us on Patreon like all of these awesome guys do if you want to help us out. And of course, a big thanks to this week's sponsor. Don't forget to check out the link in the video description if you want to check out their products. With that said, have a great day. Bye bye.